All right, let's keep going with some very introductory work with After Effects. We're going to just start with opening a new project and then looking at the interface, what windows are, what to find under menus, and what to expect with different tools and other buttons. So I'm going to create a new project from the welcome screen. If you don't have the welcome screen, then you can go to File, New, Project. That's the same thing, or even look at that. There's a shortcut with the keystrokes. So New Project just opens up After Effects as if it's ready to rock now. It's empty. There's no media, no footage or assets in there. Nothing's happening yet. If you were to open an existing project, like some that I give you to download to work through some of these tutorials, then you'll see that there's compositions, there's layers, there's some media to work with. But just right off the bat, if we take a look at what's in front of us here, we see a project window, a composition window, and then a timeline window. Why they call it, it's like, these are all, they have names, this one doesn't have it, but it's the timeline. It's where all of your layers and the magic happens. The project window is where we will keep all of our source files, our assets that we're using in the project. So photos, artwork, movies, music, anything that you will be incorporating with your motion design work is going to live here. And this is a space that can get cluttered real fast. Some of our projects get pretty monstrously large and have a lot of assets and a lot of files. So organization is really important. So if we're looking at this project window and take a peek around what's at the bottom, we've got different buttons. We have this first one, which is show me sort of a project layout. We can create a folder to keep different files in. We can create a new composition. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then the rocket file. I can't remember what the rocket file means. What does that mean? Oh, it's our project settings. Cool. It's kind of new to me, and I'm so old school. And then the trash button. So just to keep in mind organization, the folders are kind of your hero. So like if you had just a folder for audio, that'd be great. Another folder for, it went into a subfolder. I don't want that because it will select it. And then maybe here I've got movies, and then another one for vector art or something like that. And so that way, as I bring in different assets, I can quickly put them in where they belong, and you can open and collapse these things and keep things nice and tidy. I highly recommend a good organizational strategy for yourself from the get-go. Make good happen, start early, and then it just kind of becomes something that you do intuitively as you move on through your work. So that's the project window. Next to that is our composition window, and this is where we get to look at the results of what's happening in the timeline window down below, which is where the layering of backgrounds and different elements that might be animated text, all of that happen down here, and then you get to see it as if it were like on a TV screen in the composition window. So if I wanted to see what a composition looks like, I could click New Composition here, or I can use the New Composition button at the bottom of the project window, or I could even go File, Composition, New Composition, or Control-N. Those are all going to get me the same results. I don't know why I just always go here. That's where I go. A composition settings window then opens. This window, we can name our composition. Today, since we're just doing the interface, I'm just going to call it interface. And then we have all of our different presets that we can use for this. Traditionally, we're going to be just using our HDTV 1080. I'll be going through that in more detail later. So I'm not even going to worry about this right now, but I am just going to hit OK. Boom. And now we can see that there's just like a blank screen. And then my timeline window is now been updated. And it is called whatever I just named the comp. I guess that explains why it says none earlier, because there are no compositions, so it can't reference anything. We can have a lot of different compositions. You can have different compositions open all at the same time. There'll be different tabs, and those tabs will reside down there. So this being our composition window where we get to see the magic, and just for the sake of seeing something, I am just going to type in the word magic. And I'll just put that here. And you can see that that text is a layer, and it's now in my timeline window for the composition interface, and I can see it here. The composition window has a few things along the bottom that are really important to know about navigating, and the first one is what view of magnification are we looking at here. You can say just fit, or I want to look at it at 50% or something like that. Sometimes it's nice to zoom out because of some of our objects in the composition might be really large, so the handles for those things might be exceeding the boundaries of the composition, so you have to zoom out to find those things so you can move them or shrink or rotate, whatever. So the equivalent of moving through this zoom would be like Command plus or minus, and you can zoom in or out. I'm just going to go back to fit. The next option at the bottom of the composition window is our resolution. How you want After Effects to draw the art that is on the composition screen. If it's on auto, it's just going to take advantage of all of the RAM and the CPU that you have in your computer that's available, and draw it as best as it can. And if it seems like it's struggling, maybe you've got a lot of effects, a lot of layers, blurs and stuff like that going on, then it might dumb itself down a little bit so it doesn't have to draw everything so perfectly, so that your performance while you work is increased. So if I went to half, it's only drawing half of the pixels in that composition. If I go to a third, now it's only doing a third of those, and then a quarter, and so on. You can't really tell, but you can see that the nice, what used to be smooth lines of diagonals or curves here, and they look a little more jagged. And I just have to respond to my daughter real quick. Yes. And that is, it's helpful, but leaving it on auto is fine. Or if you're just being stubborn, you want it to always look good, you can set it to full. These little guys here are about what's happening with this first one with the Thunderbolt. Adaptive resolution is pretty handy. This is something that's going to also take advantage of whatever RAM and stuff is happening or available in your computer, and as you drag your playhead along your artwork that's moving, or perhaps hit play, it'll adapt as it needs to. The next one is about transparency. So by default, my composition had a black background. The black background is really kind of temporary. It will render if you were to want that black background. You could make it so that it renders out, or you could also make it so that it's transparent if you're trying to incorporate any sort of animation or work that's going to be used in another film or something like that. For example, titles or lower thirds. So it's kind of nice also to use that just to see what's happening, like where the layers are and stuff. This is a thing that will just toggle on and off their handles. So I've got the layer selected. I can see the little handles around there. Nope, it's masks. It's not handles. Yeah, it's fine. You'll see that later. We can specify a certain area to render with this next button. So if you're just trying to say, I really want to focus just on this area right now, don't consider rendering and processing and dealing with all that it takes to see everything else. Now it's just a specific area, and you can toggle that on or off and then change it. It's just a rectangle. You can't do anything more fancy than a rectangle. We have our different guides, basically, so you can do title and action safe, and this pulls up a guide that will show you some handy things, which is like your center point, dead center. And then you've got crosshairs on the sides, which shows you your vertical center, and then you've got a crosshair on the top and bottom, which shows you your horizontal centers, and then these other lines are all about safety margins for keeping yourself in check regarding text and important actions and whatnot that you don't potentially want to have cut off by a television or a screen that might be doing an overscan, which is pretty typical. So that is something you can turn on. You can turn on a proportional grid or just a grid, and things that could be handy as far as aligning your work and trying to space it out and whatnot. The most handy one is that title and action safe, and that is a quote key shortcut. You can hit that on your keyboard and it'll bring that up. Sometimes this is good for making sure that you're thinking of things centered. You can choose to show me the rendering in RGB, which is most typical, but perhaps you just want to see a green channel or a red channel, so you can pick through those channels. And I'm just going to skip this stuff for now. We'll get into that later. The time code is also shown here. So as I advance my playhead, you can see that now I'm at 12 seconds, 11 seconds, etc. We're back down at frame 1, which is 0. So that is the composition interface. The timeline interface here is, basically what you would expect from something like Photoshop or even Illustrator, or video editing programs. You have a stacking order of layers. If I were to just put in a new solid, and I'll make it yellowish orange, and its comp size. So now I have another solid, and you can rearrange these things, and we'll have a whole video just on layers here shortly. But you can see that this is where all of the elements for your design will be stacked. It has a time code. You can click on the time code and enter a certain time you want to go to. So I could do 0500, and that's going to take me to 5 seconds. There's no artwork at 5 seconds. I'll try 0200. There it is. I'm at 2 seconds. And we'll also talk about time code and frames here in a bit. But we do have the layers here, which you can turn on or off with the eyeball. Right? That should be something that's intuitive from other programs. If it's an audio file, you can turn on or off the audio. This little white circle is a solo button, so you can solo specific layers, multiple layers, so you're only focusing on that one while maybe you've done animation on other ones and now it's time to just dial in one specific thing. You can do a solo. You can lock layers. I'm going to go through all of this in the layers video in detail, but your playhead, you can scrub and move that along. You have a zoom feature here, which just allows you to zoom into time. It has nothing to do with the actual zooming of the image or anything like that. There's a way to switch between modes and switches. That's kind of a handy little button, or you can just say I want to see both of them. These are some buttons down here that open these things up. And in and out points, duration and stretch, things that you can access, which we will get in more detail later. And then you have all of these palettes, which are collapsible and expandable. Oops, I just double clicked on it. I don't want that. So all of these little palettes here are the same things you could find under window. So if you're trying to find a specific thing like, the paint palette, that will open up here, or you can just try to find it. And then you can click on the little bars on the right-hand side and say that I would like to, I don't want paint as part of this, or I don't want content-aware fill as part of my group. So you can kind of organize this area to just things that you would want specifically. Along the top of all of this is our toolbar and our properties area. So right off the bat, we have our selection tool, kind of the move tool, that allows you to do things like moving whatever objects on screen. The hand tool is really only useful for navigating around the composition area. It's not going to move anything. We have a zoom. and then lots of other tools here that we'll eventually get into in other videos, and then different ways in which we can look through our views, and you can save different views and formats and stuff like that. So in a nutshell, that is the interface for After Effects. And the more that we get into other little tutorials about layers and then animating and things like that, we're really going to start to make a lot of sense out of all of these things, and it'll feel a little more intuitive. So there you go, and we'll jump into more cool stuff next.